the Zimbabwe government has decided to limit the number of subjects that can be done at both O and A level, limiting these to 9 at O level and to 3 at A level, which I think is as a result of the public outcry from the latest results. I'm sure the ones that were announced in January for A level and for O level, where there was a record number of passes, if you like, for it at both this level. But I want to focus mainly at advanced level. Okay, so looking at the record number, that I think the highest number of subjects registered, I think was 12, and then that student managed to pass all of those subjects. And so the questions were about the credibility of the exam system or the education system that produces such a high number of passes at those those levels. And I'm sure the government is responding to that. But then looking at limiting those subjects to 3 especially A level, is its own problems, which I think may not have been considered, especially in some areas. I want to talk especially about maths and the implications this will have in that area, which may impact the sciences, because maths is actually cuts across the other areas, especially if you look at the commercials and the sciences. But I want to focus mainly on the sciences. Now, looking at that, at limiting to 3, but where is this? Maybe let's talk about the trend, where this thing started from. Now, after the introduction of the new curriculum, I think the first exams of this new curriculum were in 2018. Okay, so there's been a gradual increase in the number of subjects that have been done at A level, which is now showing with the latest results that, okay, this trend seems to be continuing as we go on. And students have actually seen that, okay, so this is becoming more fashionable, that we can do many subjects. But let's look at what was there previously, because previously, before 2018, that is, there were students who would do many subjects but didn't raise any eyebrows at that time, because it was few and far between. But then, if you look at that previous subject, or the previous curriculum, and I want to focus mainly on the maths curriculum, looking at that syllabus in maths before 2018, there was one maths, which was divided into sections. So you register maths as one subject, but then that one subject had options. Okay, so there was the paper one, right? That's 9164. I've talked about this before. So the 9164 syllabus had paper one, which was compulsory for all students, and this was pure maths. And then you had paper two. So paper two was pure maths, 72 marks out of 120. And then you had 24 marks out of 120 mechanics and 24 marks out of 120 statistics. So this was paper two. So it had pure maths, statistics, and mechanics. Then there was paper three. So paper three was largely mechanics, 96 out of 120 mechanics, and the 24 out of 120 was statistics. Then the last paper, that is paper four, was largely statistics, which was 96 out of 120. And then the 24 out of that 120 was mechanics. So there was no paper, there was no option, which was purely one section of it, whether it was pure maths or it was just the applied maths, if you like. So moving on from that, there was also an option for those who wanted to challenge themselves, that is the further maths. So they will then add that subject for those junior students who will want to challenge themselves. They will take the further maths, which now has been changed, which was changed in the new curriculum. And you have now those subjects, that is pure maths as a standalone subject. We have mechanical mathematics as a standalone subject. Then you have statistical mathematics as a standalone subject. And in addition, you have the additional maths, which was the further maths before 2018. So looking at those changes, so a student now who does maths this side of the new curriculum, then you have them taking either pure maths and statistical maths, or pure maths and mechanical maths. So this has been the trend. So it makes it a bit hard for a student to only take one of those. It can be there, Some will actually do maybe only pure maths. Okay, but then for balancing purposes, that is, you will look at the student who is mostly in the physics section, those who want to be in the engineering side of things. They will maybe want to do with the mechanical maths, and those maybe in the commercial world will want to do maybe with the statistical maths. But then there is a mix of that, because these are mainly applied maths, where you're applying the concepts of the pure maths. But then if you're limiting the number to three, you're largely saying these subjects can be done away with, some of them, because it can be practically impossible to register only mechanical maths, for example. And it can be practically impossible to register only additional maths without registering the pure maths itself. So this limiting of subjects to only three subjects at A level will then phase out. As I see it, it will phase out these other subjects. I'm talking from a point of having been involved in the math subjects at national level, where I was maybe examining the subject, and also being an item writer, which I've talked about before anyway, if you have been following my videos. So looking at that, and looking at limiting the number that can be done, the number of subjects, especially at A level, will then mean that the other subjects will have to die a natural death, because it's practically impossible to register only one of those without focusing, let's say, on pure maths, as it were. Because looking at the old curriculum, there was pure maths, and then were these other options. All right. So now, looking at the application of this and looking at other systems, I want to draw a conclusion, maybe in a comparison here about this number of subjects. The the current record of a student that, or maybe of a learner who registered many subjects at A level, is currently held by a student who is in the UK, and this student actually passed 24 A level subjects. Compare this to the 12 subjects that were passed by a student in the Zimbabwean education system. And then, okay, this is a record. Of course, I'm not saying this, I'm not advocating for many subjects at A level, but I'm saying this is the record that is there, right? And in this student, you look at how they did that. Okay, so that's a record breaking. Anyway, that's about that. But looking at the education system in the UK itself, it limits the number of subjects to three or four. And this is largely on school policies, and this is largely on the timetabling issues, and also on the funding, because these students don't self-register for these exams. They are actually registered for by the schools. And so the schools cannot afford to register these many subjects. And besides, looking at the universities, what they actually take, the students they take, they base mainly on the three subjects. It doesn't matter whatever other subjects you will do, but they will mainly base, even looking at the Oxford, the Cambridge universities, they will base their intake on those three subjects. So you can look at it that way. If you want to advocate for many subjects, then you ask yourself, why will they do many subjects? And then if you're advocating for few subjects, is you're also limiting what they can do. Right. So in conclusion, as I look at it, what is actually needed, or what the actual approach should be like, is maybe guidance on students. Career guidance is important. And why is there a drive to do many subjects? And as I said, it is largely because of others have done it. So I can also want to break that record. Or schools market themselves using that front of saying, we have produced the highest number of passes at A level. So students will likely want to go to that school, because they know, if I go to that school, then I will pass the subject. And what about also the intake at the universities? Because this is a contributing factor. So if it can be made clear to students as they do their A levels, that we just want to look at this, not all those other things that you will do, maybe. um, so this can form part of the career guidance that universities can communicate, can make it clear that we want only this. We don't want all those other things. But then, of course, we live in the world of competition. But does it help a student anyway to do all those subjects? And then my take will be limiting to 3 is actually a bit low, which can be practically impossible for other areas, like the sciences subjects, like the math subjects, if I can put it that way. So if maybe you can limit it to 5 or 4, in let's say to 4, so that it allows other subjects to be done. Otherwise you will have to then do away with those subjects, because there won't be anyone taking them. They will focus mainly on those that they think will be more beneficial to them, and the other ones will be redundant. Anyway, that is my take on this topic of on this subject of registering only 3 subjects, especially at A level.